Hi, this is Steve. I'm going to show you how easy it is to use the Accounts Payable module in Dynamics GP. I'm going to add a vendor. I'm going to create some vendor invoices. I'm going to put those into a check batch and then print the checks. It's really quite easy to do. Let's take a look at it. So the first thing we want to do is go to the purchasing area page. Let's click on that. And the first thing we're going to do is set up a new vendor. So I'm going to go to cards and then click on vendor. This is going to open up the vendor maintenance screen, and here we can edit existing vendors, but we can also add new vendors. So the first thing you want to do is set up a vendor ID. So let's do that. So a convention I use is I put some alpha characters at the front, makes it look up a little easier. Then I put some numbers at the end in case I've got duplicates on that first part of that vendor ID. So I'll enter the vendor ID and then the vendor name. So the next thing I want to do is add this vendor to a class ID. So we showed you how to do that a little earlier. So I'm going to look up a vendor class, and I've got a number of different classes here. So I'm going to select this one here. And what's the advantage of this is going to take all the defaults from that class ID and populate the new vendor record with that. The next thing I want to do is add an address ID. I can have as many addresses as I want to, but I have to have at least one. So I'm going to add that here. And then I could add the address and add that to that vendor record. And then this is all I really need for the vendor record, so I'm going to hit save. So now let's enter a payables invoice for this particular vendor. So I go back to the area page for purchasing and go to the transactions area, and I'm going to scroll down and hit transaction entry. This will bring up the transaction entry screen in order that I can enter vendor's invoice. It automatically assigns the voucher number for me, and I've got different types of transactions I can put in, but we'll just put an invoice in, and then I'm going to enter a little more information about this, and I can assign it to a batch ID if I want to, but I'm just going to leave it. It will automatically default to the document date that's on my system. I can change that if I want to. This will impact the posting date and also the aging date if I want. So let's continue here. I'm going to look up the vendor, type in the first part of the vendor ID. Again, it gives me a list, so I'm going to select the vendor that I want. It fills in with all the defaults. Again, I can change these defaults for this particular transaction if I want to. I'll go to the document number and type in the document number, which is actually the invoice number, the vendor invoice number. And then I'm going to scroll down to purchases, and I can put in the amount of the invoice here. And you can see that this particular vendor was a 1099 vendor, so the 1099 amount already fills in by itself. I can change this amount if I want to, but let's just leave it as it is. And then let's take a look at the distributions. I want to check the distribution of the particular invoice, and you can see that these are the distributions here. There's going to be a debit to contract services and credit to accounts payable, so that's fine. If I wanted to add additional distributions, I could do that in this screen here, but that's okay. So I'm just going to hit OK. And then I could put this in a batch if I wanted to, but I'm just going to post it online real time. I'm just going to hit post. So it's going to post this transaction, and it's going to post it to accounts payable and also post it to the general ledger. So now I'd like to write a check for that particular invoice. So the first thing I need to do is set up a check batch that has that invoice in it. So there's a couple ways to do it, but the easy way to do it is just go to transactions in the purchasing area page and then hit edit check batch. I like this screen because I can see all the vendors to whom I owe money, and then for each vendor I can select which invoices I want to pay. So the first thing I want to do is put in a batch ID. I'm going to need to do that. And I'm going to add this batch because the batch doesn't exist. So it's going to bring up this screen here. I'm going to select the checkbook ID. And I can add additional information if I want to, but I'm just going to save this batch as it is. So all the invoices that I select to pay are going to be in this particular batch. I can save this batch and go back and work with it later, or what I will do is take this batch and turn it into checks. So I'm going to tab through here, and when I do that, it's going to show me all the vendors that I have in my system that I owe money to. So I'm going to select the one that we just entered here, and here's the invoice that we just entered. I'm going to select that, And then I'm going to save that into my batch. So I'm going to hit OK. Now that batch has been saved. I can go back in it. So let's take a look at it. I can go back and I can look up that check batch. Here's my batch right here. So I can edit this batch as much as I want to, but when it's time to print the checks, I just look up the batch and I hit print checks. So when I hit print checks, it's going to go through a check writing routine. It brings up the next number of the check stock that I have. And there's different types of check formats that I can use. I'm going to use this one here. And then I'm going to go ahead and print the checks. So I'll click on print checks. It's going to print them to the screen here. And I could easily print them to the printer. So this shows me the image of the checks that are about to be printed. So if I wanted to, I could just print these checks now, print them to stock. But let's take a look at them here. So these are my checks, and this is the way that they're going to print out. So if I printed them out, I would print them out. And then I've got a couple options. So this is the post payables check window. And this is generator. This screen comes up after you print the checks, and you've got some options. If everything's good, you can post those checks. If they're not good, you can reprint the checks, or you can void the checks. They look fine to me, so I'm just going to post those checks. So I'm going to hit process here. And when I hit process, it's going to update my bank reconciliation module. It's going to update payables to show those invoices being paid, and it's going to update the journal ledger. So that's a quick look at how easy it is to use accounts payable in Dynamics GP. We added a vendor invoice to that vendor, we created a check batch, and then we printed those checks. It's really quite simple.